Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about When They See Us, Part 3, Episode 3, whatever the way I usually phrase this. So, full spoilers for the episode, and like the last two, this is fully brought to you by Patreon, one of our patrons, paid for this review, over at patreon.com/mailfusttv. Should mention that. Always get the address out. But yeah, so this is the episode with the time jump, the big time jump, where we see 4 of the 5 get out of jail and try to fit back into the world and society. The transitions from the kids to the adult versions are pretty well done, especially the first 2, I thought. Notably, Corey is missing from this episode, and that's a very, I think, compelling tactic in this episode, because whenever he's brought up, because occasionally there's a scene where his mother's there, or the other characters talk about how he's the only one who's not out yet, and they talk about him being in an adult prison and how his experience is different and presumably much worse than everyone else's. It really builds a lot of kind of dread. You kind of, as bad as everyone else is having it, because the other 4 are obviously have been very hard done by in their lives, but there's this kind of dread of somehow Corey's is going to be even worse, and presumably that's what a part of episode 4 is going to delve into. But holding it back here really did give it this kind of aura, this mystique that I'm not looking forward to discovering. But the episode here transitions, like I say, for all the kids, or the other 4 at least, into adults. And I'd say it's not equal in terms of screen time between them. Some have more of a story here than others. Raymond perhaps having the most, has being perhaps the most tragic of the 4. And that he's the one who ultimately falls into crime after feeling like he has no other options, and gets arrested again at the end of the episode. And it's a really heartbreaking scene at the end. But you can kind of see how he's struggling throughout the episode. You can see all the steps that he goes through before he's it feels like he's put in a corner where he can't do anything. He can't get hired. He has all of these stipulations. He has to, all of them have to register as sex offenders. That's something that comes up a few times in this episode. He's also a felon, as far as the law is concerned. So these are things that he has to declare, and he's turned away from work. His home life, well, his father does very much love him. In fact, we see that. In fact, the wonderful transition to his adulthood is that his father, who can't make it to the prison that he's at to visit him regularly, he does actually wait by the phone every day to talk to him. And the conversations are really normal and kind of mundane. It's like, hey, what did you have for dinner? And they talk every day. And you get the impression that that's a thing. But we see that he's got a new stepmom. His father's got a new wife who doesn't seem particularly enthusiastic about all this, and certainly doesn't when Raymond comes back. And obviously Raymond has nowhere else to go, so he's going to live with his father, who now has a wife and a new baby. And the wife has a big family. All the cousins and nieces and nephews are always there. And we get this sense, and the sense that Raymond's clearly feeling in all these scenes, that he doesn't really feel like he's welcome there anymore. Not I mean, by his father, sure, but not the rest of them, not everyone else that's there. To the point where she's looking at him kind of funny. You get the sense that, well, his father doesn't believe that he actually committed the rape. Clearly, this wife isn't as believing of that. You know, the way she kind of gives him the side eye, the way she then brings it up later when they get into argument, she calls him a rapist, she calls him a felon. It makes these kind of cracks. Seems to be very against him every step of the way. And of course, a lot of the world is kind of against him every step of the way as well. In fact, one of the heartbreaking scenes of the episode is right at the start, before the time jump, when he's been sent away. He's gone, he's incarcerated, but we see it as a family birthday, and his father's brother kind of pulls him up and, you know, talks about how the family's really hurting because of what he did, and calls him a rapist. And Raymond's father has to defend him, and it gets kind of emotional. The part of this scene that I really liked was when he starts to sort of get upset because he actually is the one who told him to go to the park, because he says, oh, the street corners are more dangerous, go to the park, it's safer, or something to that effect. You know, it was his advice that actually sent him to the park to socialize. That was kind of his own advice. So he feels guilty about that. He feels like he is some way responsible. So that really plays like an lying kind of feeling to the rest of the relationship that they have throughout this episode. And the first time that he arrives home, the first time that he gets back to the apartment building where his father lives, and he's going back to the house, and he has this emotional moment where he hugs his father. The first thing he sees, though, like, he has to walk through the dealers in the corner, right? That are outside the house, outside the building, just maybe a couple of doors down. He has to walk past them, and they're kind of this ever looming presence in his world the second he gets out of prison, and the temptation and that offer dangling in front of him is kind of there from the start, and he has no intention. He has scenes with other characters where he says he has no intention of ever being caught doing anything or going back, and it's after he is rejected for jobs. It's after he feels incredibly unwelcome with his stepmom, for lack of a better term, who throws a basic fit at him when he is caught with a woman in the apartment. She's very upset by this, and it causes a big scene. This woman is someone who was writing to Raymond when he was inside, and he'd kind of broken it off because he kind of felt like he had no hope for anything. He didn't see a happy ending, and he's kind of encouraged to reach out and maybe form a bond, a relationship, have something new and healthy in his life, something different. And it actually starts to take off, and they have kind of a sweet scene when they actually, because there's a little bit of turmoil along the way, but they eventually have kind of a sweet love scene that we see the start of. And it did occur to me during this scene that this is probably his first time. I mean, given that he was sent to juvie, I mean, sure, he might have had sex really young for all we know, but likelihood this was his first time. It's certainly his first time since he was probably too young to be doing it, and it's very sweet, and it's very kind of genuine, and it's a stark contrast from the way everyone else looks at him in every other scene, and that's something that goes for a lot of the characters. Obviously, all four of them get characters treating them like they're criminals, looking at them funny, all these kind of things. And it's when she starts to, once they're in a relationship, she starts to talk about getting a place for the two of them, and how it's only going to be this deposit and yada yada, and he just doesn't have the money. He's just not earning or getting a job that would sustain an apartment or sustain a place to live like that. And it's this, almost the hope of having something better, but needing to not having the resources to achieve it because the deck's so stacked against him, that ultimately makes him consider going to align with the dealers and start getting involved with that. And it's something that immediately, as soon as his father starts to be aware that he's doing it towards the end of the episode, he immediately is disappointed in him, and he's immediately kind of judgmental of him. And it's almost like, even though his father has been the one who's been in his corner the whole time, and he's the most understanding of any of the other characters towards him, even he kind of falls guilty here at the end a little bit, where he never even stops to kind of consider or certainly try and help with the situation. Like, yes, he gives him a place to live, obviously, but doesn't necessarily put that much effort past that on its own to actually try and make him feel more welcome, make him feel more included. But more importantly, in the context of what I'm talking about here, he immediately just kind of sees him as going down this bad path and chastises him for it and critiques it, without really understanding just how in a corner he is in terms of his options. And he isn't understanding. Instead of encouraging him, instead of saying, here are your options, here's what I'm going to help you do, because he's right, he shouldn't be doing this. This is just going to lead to, to being arrested again. It's going to lead to a lot of bad things. But what he should be doing, instead of like demonizing him and saying, you're doing this awful thing, how dare you, he should be offering him the solutions. He should be offering him, here's what I'm going to do to try and help. Here's what I'm going to do to try. Maybe he can help him get out of a job. Maybe he can help him do other things. Maybe he can do whatever. Help with the down payment on the place. Whatever it may be. But he doesn't necessarily offer anything. There's a lack of communication there between them. And it's definitely not the only father-son relationship we're going to be talking about in this. But, Raymond's story is quite tragic. And there's that moment where he gets very upset when he's like the kids, the wife's family's running all over the couch, and he has this, it really sells this idea that so much has changed since he went away, that when he was a kid he was like yelled at by his grandmother for putting his feet on the couch, and here he's watching all these kids run all over it, and things have changed, and it's like he's trying to cling to some normalcy, the normalcy that he remembers before he went away. But that world has changed, and I think that's really hard for him to really get a grasp on. And again, it makes him feel more alienated and more unwelcome than perhaps he even did when he was in the inside. It was certainly, once he was once he was there for a while. But so no, really, really heartbreaking side of the story. Next up in terms of time is probably Tron. A lot of stuff with his father, of course, played by Michael K. Williams, who is sick now, and Tron is not in a good place with him. He kind of he doesn't really like the idea that his mother took him back in, because we find out that he left for a long time and came back. And there's a couple of wonderful touches with this. I really liked the transition, because he gets the first transition where it's his mother's talking to him, visiting him as a kid, and he's talking about this dream, and she gives him this great speech, because he talks about the footsteps in his dream, and the mother talks about how, those footsteps are mine, because I'm always with you, I'm always coming to help you, I'm always going to be here. And it's this great speech, and it transitions to him walking out as a man. And so that was a really great little touch there, the way it handled that. But one of the things that I really loved about some of the callbacks to episode 1 with Tron is that the first time we ever saw him with his father, it felt like a healthy relationship. It was them eating, I think, cheeseburgers for lunch. And there's a scene in this where after he's been back a couple of days or whatever, he's lifting weights in his room, and his father makes some lunch. He makes some soup, I think it is, or whatever, and he's like, "Tron, are you hungry?" And he's struggling to speak. He can't breathe properly. The illness is taking its toll on him. He's trying to bond with his son, but his son, of course, remembers everything his father did. Remembers not only that he convinced him to say the wrong thing in the police station, not only that, but also the fact that he wasn't there for the trial. This sort of sense of abandonment, and then presumably also because he abandoned his mother when she was on her own, and presumably in a rough place because of what was going on with Tron. So there's this great scene where he tries to say, "Hey, I made lunch for us. I was hoping we could talk," and Tron just ignores him. And I think the fact that we started their relationship in the show with them having lunch and being happy and having this really strong, seemingly father-son relationship, and just how this is such a, it's dead. It's a broken shell of what it was at this point. And there's some moments later on where Tron helps him back into bed when he goes to fall. And one of the things that the mother brings up with him when he's kind of saying, I would never have taken him back in. I wish you hadn't done that kind of line of thinking. She says, yes, he's made mistakes and he's done some bad things, but am I supposed to hold it against him forever? Because Tron says, I made a mistake listening to him all those years ago when he told me to say this in the police station. And, the mother says she made a mistake doing something. And he's like, and she's like, no, are we supposed to have this against us for the rest of our lives? Should there not be some amount of forgiveness? Should there not be some kind of empathy? And it's a really interesting theme to kind of bring in here for him, because he has every right in the world to be angry. All of these guys have every right in the world to kind of resent the everything, resent the world and resent the people in it and resent the system more than anything, perhaps. But this idea of empathy, and because these people ultimately, these guys, everything we saw of them as kids presented them as fairly good kids, right? I'm sure they did dumb stuff because they were kids, but they all came across as somewhat likable. They all came across as empathetic human beings. And now that they're out, obviously they're all in different places, and we see Raymond trying. Of course, Tron is in a really much colder place than he was as a kid. He's still very much focused on trying to go to school and get his life back together. Now he's an adult, to the point where there's this woman that he works with at a movie theater who they kind of go out on dates, seemingly out for a little while, and she's kind of frustrated because he's not taking her to restaurants. And it turns quite nasty because she essentially she calls him a felon, basically, when he tries to break up with her, because he wants to focus, he wants to put every penny he has into saving for school and improving his life and getting the life back that he lost. And spending money on lavish dates is not really something he wants to do. It's not something that he is devoted to. And instead of trying to understand this or seeing where he's coming from, she calls him a felon, accuses him of the rape. Now that he's upset her, it's convenient to remember that and throw it back in his face. And it's another example of how people are going to use this against him. Because I can't imagine that before this she really believed it. Otherwise, why is she on a date with him? Why is she interested in once she knows who he is? But she uses it immediately here. now that it's convenient for her to do so. So it's this really sad kind of reality that some of these characters are kind of having to live with. And yeah, so that stuff was heartbreaking. And then the final two, Yusuf and Kevin, we get probably about the same of both of those characters, where Kevin has a great scene with his family coming to visit him because his sisters and his mother come to see him, and he has, I guess, a very healthy visit to them where he's listening to this story about his sister who tells him that she was, she works at this place where she feels very alone. Her co-workers don't really appreciate her or like her. And this guy came in. She works at like a rental, like a van rental and vehicle rental place. And this guy comes in to rent a minivan for something. I think it was his mother's or grandmother's bingo trip or something. And she likes him and she flirts, and she talks about how she waited for like 3 days because that's when he was going to bring the van back. And she was so excited, and she's telling her little brother the story, and he's all into it. And she's like, "But I said no when he asked me out," and he couldn't understand. And but it's a really fun and endearing way it presents it. And she's like, "Look, no, there's more to the story. There's more to the story." And she felt guilty about having a good life. She felt guilty about doing these happy, normal things and taking her life further because her brother is going through this awful thing that he doesn't deserve. But ultimately, they shouldn't feel, the idea that the mother sort of chimes in that they shouldn't feel guilty, and that guilt accomplishes nothing. And we should all try and move forward and be there for each other, and so on and so on. So she's like, yeah, I went on some dates and I look forward to seeing them, and you should have something to look forward to. It was a really nice sentiment in the scene. And when he smiles and says, "I'm happy for you," you really believe it. And I think Kevin was always really one of the most instantly sympathetic characters. He always felt so gentle and quiet, which made it really painful to watch the interrogation scenes, specifically in episode 1. But him as an adult, he really feels he doesn't want to go and register as a sex offender. His sister drives him there, and he's really upset about it. And this is actually one of the scenes that kind of hints at the Corey thing, because even his sister says, "You're the last one out. Everyone else has done this," and he says, "No, Corey's not out." And she sort of sighs and goes, "Oh, I meant of the 4 of you." Even this idea that they kind of separated them in their minds, that they started thinking of it as the 4, and then there was this extra one who was kind of separate, which again, makes it feel really bad. So, and then he actually meets up with Yusuf. Yusuf gets out, seemingly gets married off screen. He actually gets a pretty good job by just sort of learning how to work with computers. And when he runs into Kevin, because we see examples of him struggling, learning that he can't get a normal job in a lot of ways. Anything that requires some kind of license or certification because of his felony history. But he runs into Kevin at this sort of mandatory meeting, and they kind of catch up. And what's so great about it is just how warm their interaction feels. It really feels like two friends who have very few other people they can confide in. Sure, yeah, Yusuf has his wife and obviously his mother, and Kevin has his family too. But this idea that everyone else around him doesn't, and when Kevin goes to hand these papers into the woman who's running this, she immediately gives him a look when she reads who he is. And it's this like instant, daggers through the eyes of like, she's just looking at him like he's a rapist. And then she announces that they have 2 of the Central Park 5 there, and she wants Kevin to stand up and admit to what he did because that's part of this process. And the pair of them, respectfully as possible, say, "No, we are not lying. We did not do this. We declined the plea bargain once upon a time. We didn't lie then. We're not going to lie now." And even though they get kicked out, and they're probably going to get some trouble from the parole officers or whoever from this, this is actually a really sweet moment. Like when they come out of the building and they're kind of laughing with each other, it really feels like warm, and it feels like in an episode that's full of cold moments, full of like heartbreaking details where characters are treating these men badly. This moment where they find each other and they're smiling and they're happy and they're joking, and like it just there's a warmth there that reminds you that these are people, and the way that everyone else has judged them based on nothing essentially is it's kind of heartbreaking. But it's a really good moment of warmth in the episode. And then again, they mention Corey. They mention that they don't know where he is right now. They're not really sure. They've heard stories. Things don't sound so good. And yeah, so a lot of great little things there. There's a scene early on actually with Yusuf's mother again separating Corey, because Corey's mother's there, and Corey's mother asks her, "Hey, could you have Yusuf write to Corey?" And they're not supposed to actually contact each other like this. Felons aren't supposed to be having correspondence. But she's like, "Hey, if you get him to write a note, and you can take it from him, give it to me, I can pass it on." And it's not a big deal, right? He can hear from his friend, and that'll give him some hope. It'll give him something to latch onto. And Yusuf's mother declines, much to her dismay, and it's this awkward thing where she comes across as quite cold in the scene, and it's easy to sort of look at this as being a little selfish. Maybe isn't quite the right word, but she very much sees this as a potential caveat or a potential problem for her son. Because if in the small chance that this becomes an issue, that he gets caught sending notes to this other person, this other felon, she sees this as hampering his ability to get out in a timely fashion. She sees this as a threat to her son, and she's always very much been about her own son, and doesn't seem to be as outwardly concerned about the others. And you understand it. She's a mother. You get it. You get why she's thinking of him first and says that this is just not happening. But Corey, again, the implications here that Corey's in a much worse place. He doesn't even have like a school system in his prison because he's in an adult prison. He's not in a juvenile detention center. So all this teasing, all of this kind of build up to what Corey's situation is has got me a little terrified of what the next episode is going to bring, because it's not like it's all happy for these characters here, even though they find moments of happiness. Kevin does seem happy with his family, and Yusuf is married. Tron notably does start using a different last name at the end. He scratches out his name. He's at like a new job, construction site or maybe a warehouse, something like that. He's in like a forklift, and he puts down a different last name. This idea that, I mean, there's a couple of things here where, one, maybe he doesn't want to be recognised for who he is, and that's a tactic there. You might also argue that if that's his father's name, maybe he wants to kind of get away from that as well, as a symbolic thing. So, I mean, there's details there to kind of dive into. But, yeah, and, Raymond, of course, like, sort of tastes happiness, but does not feel welcome and has maybe the hardest time of it of everyone out of the four that we see. And unfortunately ends up back in the system, which is a sad part of this, is that, it's often talked about that whether or not someone is guilty of whatever crime they committed, depending on the severity of it, they end up in the system. And once they're in the system doesn't really rehabilitate. It just kind of maybe almost sends them further down the rabbit hole. And in here we see someone who is innocent, we know is innocent, and has been turned to a life of crime because of the circumstances that have been presented to him. And that is heartbreaking. They actually made, the system made a criminal from someone who wasn't. And it's hard not to be mad at that. It's hard not to be upset. When he earlier in this very episode said, "That's not going to be me. I'm not going back. I'm not going to be caught doing anything. I'm never going to be in prison again." And the episode ends with that, and it's really quite sad. So part 3 is good. Honestly, it might be my least favorite of the 3 so far, and that's not really to say it's anything less than excellent, because it's very, very good. And obviously one of the things to talk about in this one is that we've changed actors for half of the cast, because all the boys are now men and we have different actors, and I thought I did a good job casting them. For various reasons. Not only do some of them look very, like in the ballpark of what you'd expect some of these kids to look like when they're older, I think they also do a really good job of, if not that, at least having the warmth. The reason why I say warmth is because I think Kevin is one who maybe looks the most different. Kevin didn't really strike me as looking the same as his kid version, whereas I think Yusuf, I can see that being Yusuf growing up. Raymond, I can kind of see. Tron can kind of see. Kevin's the one who feels the most different, but even though he doesn't look exactly what I think that kid would look like growing up, he has the warmth that kid did. The way he smiles, the way he talks to his sister, the way he laughs with Yusuf, it feels like that character. or at least how I imagine that character would end up being. You know, like, it feels like there's a nice through line there that feels connected to who that person was before. And, you know, Yusuf, again, he's still a little socially awkward. He still feels like Yusuf. So no, I like those casting choices. I think are really strong. And although I believe the actor who plays Corey still plays Corey. He actually, and I guess symbolically that's quite interesting because he went to adult prison. So the idea that he's already the adult, you know, from the start, is an interesting tactic. So I'm looking forward to seeing part 4. So that was part 3 of When They See Us. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe, all that stuff. You can get me on the Twitters, or you get me on the Twitters at Wibble89, but you can get everyone, you can get the channel as a whole on Twitter at mail_fuzz for channel. You can support us on patreon.com/mailfuzztv. As I mentioned at the start, these When They See Us reviews are purely funded by Patreon, so please go and have a look and see if you're interested in, you know, support us for little as $1 per month and getting some bonuses for your trouble. And you can, of course, also hit the like button, which is the nice and free way to support us, and it is actually super helpful and is probably more helpful than you think it is. So please do. But otherwise, that's me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys, and I will see you next time.